Welcome to this inaugural edition of the webinar series of the Surgeon's Record. I'm Ben Schwartz. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I serve as editor-in-chief of the Surgeon's Record, which is a series of content about value-based specialty care, healthcare technology, focused on surgeons and really anybody with an interest in healthcare innovation. Honored today to have Nick Aubin, who's CEO of Commons Clinic, and Dean Dalili, who is Chief Medical Officer of DeepScribe. We're going to talk about ambient AI scribes today and how that integrates into a value-based care situation. So quickly, Nick and Dean, if you want to introduce yourselves. Nick, if you want to go first, yourself and your company, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ben. Just by way of background, my name is Nick Aubin, co-founder and CEO of Commons Clinic. We are building an advanced practice model for multi-specialty services with an initial focus on the musculoskeletal stack, so spine, orthopedics, interventional pain management, physical therapy, and working to infuse new and novel technologies into our care model. And we're really excited to be working with DeepScribe and Dean's team. And I know we're going to talk about not only the promise of ambient scribe technologies, but also our little secret sauce that we're trying to bring to it and hopefully ignite conversation on how we can deploy these technologies, both at scale and for new and evolving use cases.
Yeah, hi, Ben. My name is Dean Dalili. I'm Chief Medical Officer of DeepScribe. I'm a internal medicine doc by training, hospitalist clinically for almost 20 years prior to joining DeepScribe. My background is in physician practice management, where I have had a long career trying to manage physicians at scale. And I would say my general philosophy is trying to make it easier for them to do the right thing. I think there's an application for that philosophy through ambient technology. And yeah, really happy to be here and talk about our partnership.
Yeah, that's great. And so that kind of leads me into my first question. Obviously, there's a lot of different tech tools out there. There's a lot of provider organizations. How did you two guys come together? Nick, how do you find Dean? Dean, how do you find or work with a practice like Commons Clinic? Maybe go through that process. I think it would be interesting for people to hear in this kind of sea of providers and tech solutions. How do two innovators like yourselves find each other?
Yeah, so I'll kick things off. So, as a venture-backed healthcare services founder, I have a lot of exposure to, great technology companies. And it's funny, I'm actually probably on the conservative end of like, I have enough early stage risk at Commons. I don't like working with, either early stage or emerging technologies if I can help it. And so I've actually been probably more so than most an AI skeptic about like how far along we all are and how impactful it can be on a day to day. And that has changed a little bit for me, especially with meeting Dean and the DeepScribe team. Dean and I have known each other for a while, but meeting the DeepScribe team, just given the like sheer product market fit that ambient scribe technologies clearly have in the world. And so Commons actually kicked off basically an RFP process, looking at a bunch of the different technologies, and we're, continue to be really excited by a lot of different options. But it wasn't until some of our spine surgeons, and specifically Dr. Hyun Bae, one of our kind of, marquee, well-known physicians, went to a conference in Cabo and sent me a text and said, "You got to look at the DeepScribe guys. They just did a demo live on stage, and it's amazing." And like when our physicians stand up and are advocating for innovation, like there's some chum in the water there, and that really queued things up, and have been really impressed with the team, the technology, and the willingness to build on future use cases gets us really excited.
Yeah, very cool. I had two thoughts there. Number one is I probably should have been a spine surgeon since our meetings, I do hips and knees, aren't in Cabo. We go to Dallas, which is fine. And then the other thought is, segueing to that, and I'm sure Dean can speak to this, of this general maybe reluctance or reticence or pushback on the part of clinicians, particularly if you're busy in clinic. Anytime you talk about changing workflows, I think the knee-jerk reaction on the part of a doctor or surgeon is going to be like, "No, wait a minute, I've been doing this for 15 years the same way." Dean, how do you overcome that? How do you go to a busy spine surgeon and say, "Yes, I'm coming into your clinic. It's going to be a little bit different process, but there might be a small learning curve, but once you get through the learning curve, it's going to be a lot better. How do you overcome that level of skepticism?
Yeah, Ben, that's a great question, and I would say that's something we think very deeply about, and we're always looking for ways to learn and iterate on our experience with customer success and implementations. I would say, as you know, as I know, physicians are like snowflakes. They're all sort of created and uniquely, and their approach to change, I would say, has got to be you've got to have a compelling reason for someone to try to do something different. I'm always amazed at how much people will continue to do something knowing it's inefficient because of the change management effort that it takes to even get to an easier solution. It's an investment of time, and it's sort of like akin to the reason why some of us have elderly parents. They use outdated iPhones, and you literally have to hand them the new one and go through entering in their password, their login, etc., and then hand them a fully functional device before they would ever make the change themselves. Um, but what I would say is that we are intentional when we talk about large groups about trying to find early adopters, people who are willing to embrace the new technology, who see the value in doing things differently. And then as we have success, social proofing that story to other members of the group who may be open to change, but who need to hear from their colleagues that the change is worth, an investment in their time.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, particularly surgeons, we're very competitive, and so if somebody's doing something and it seems to be working really well, and there's some buzz about it, and other people are talking about it, that really, I think, spurs other people to adopt it. But you find those early champions that are willing to sort of go through that process with you and de-risk it a little bit from that standpoint. Thinking about value-based care and really what Commons' mission is, how does a tool like DeepScribe really feed into a value-based care arrangement? Is it efficiency? Is it the doctor's level of satisfaction and ability to be productive? What about DeepScribe? What about AI tools really support that value-based care mission?
So I think when I get at the core of value-based care, it's ultimately about aligned incentives. And you can't really have, in my opinion, aligned incentives if people are having different conversations and if people, both patients, providers, team members behind the scenes on the operations side don't have the same data. And I think what ambient technologies and DeepScribe are doing is at the end of the day, the AI engine's really cool, but the major behavior change is like that audio recording of the office visit, the transcript, and that data that can then be used in kind of, sunshine's the best disinfectant, the ability to make that accessible, not just in clinical notes, but in future use cases where that can turn into data and ultimately insights, I think allows people to better optimize things, right? And so for us, there's the efficiency of giving our physicians a new tool to be able to have a better day, prevent burnout, like all that good stuff, right? But it's ultimately like the data that comes out of that, richer notes, richer insights, more human anecdotes about what's happening with that patient that allows like someone in my seat who doesn't have I don't have a clinical bone in my body, but I can look at that and I can look at, the real human toll of a musculoskeletal issue and say, okay, we can build something new, a new service for that. Like maybe our patients are yearning for psychosocial support or something that we learned from all of this, and ultimately that gives us this impetus to be able to build more and to be able to use that data to do more interesting things. And I think that's really where I think ambient technologies are creating this kind of core internal conversation at care delivery organizations where people just have more information and then can build more tools on top of that foundational patient physician relationship and really support in ways that they never have been able to before.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing, because EMRs and the way they're set up now and these sort of templates and things like that. I mean, the data that gets put in there is either not great or it's not very specific or very helpful. So I think, taking in all the data and then being able to pick out what's important, but doing it in a way that's natural really is helpful in figuring out what your outcomes are, figuring out what's important, connecting the dots. So Dean, talk about DeepScribe. How does DeepScribe go about supporting that? Obviously, it makes it easier to record the data. And how, which ways does it make it easier to maybe parse the data, pick things out, record things the way that are helpful from a clinical perspective? Talk about how DeepScribe goes about recording and maybe extracting some of that information.
Yeah, all great questions. I would say, the first lens to think about when you think about ambient technology is it doesn't take many notes for you to review and compare to audio recordings before you realize that the old way of template-based documentation really leaves a lot of context out clinically that's very relevant. And some of the feedback that we got from early adopters of ambient was, wow, like there really is a lot of data here related to patient conversations about, let's take, for example, like the nature of an injury, how it's impacting their life, their quality of life, or their functional status with regard to their ability to work. Many of these things feed into insurance authorization capability, and providers would commonly not write a sufficient level of detail into the note. And so just to have there be, clinical context within the way in which we structured our data, because a normal where thinking back to like the competitive framework in which DeepScribe is operating, there's a lot of ambient scribe technologies, and there's, honestly, to be transparent, like cheaper solutions, but that are not custom built to structure the data or the note in a way that's clinically contextual, in a way that is helpful for improving documentation, also helping with decision making. And so as we got early feedback from some of our orthopedic and spine users, they told us, here are the elements of the data that are really specific to our clinical context that we want to make sure we capture and that we structure. So the way ambient technology works is it'll listen to the conversation between a patient and a provider. It'll both create a recording and then a transcript, and then restructure that data into the elements and into the structure of the template of the notes that we've formatted. And then I would say, being able to build really robust plans for patients with regard to what are the medication therapies that they're going to prescribe, if there's any rehabilitation. So being able to go a level deeper in terms of trying to structure patient instructions then gives you a much more robust record of like what the history of the evolution of the disease is. The very foundational layer for us is the ability to be able to create the note and integrate into workflows in a way that has that's clinically relevant. Now, moving beyond that is what we at DeepScribe call ambient intelligence. And that is, how do we take, beyond just writing the note, how do we take information from the organization or from third-party best practices and try to inform the care that's being delivered in real time? And so does that mean, can we prompt a physician to be thinking about, we call them internally nudges, are there areas of focus that are particularly relevant? In a value-based care context, that might be something related to documentation of associated codes or medical illnesses, right? Whereas in the historical, workflows, orthopedic surgeons may really just be laser focused on the primary injury or source of the visit. Whereas pulling in some of the richer data related to a patient's historical record, in a value-based care context can be really important, not only to risk adjusting payment, but thinking about, outcomes in terms of those that are observed over those that are expected, and making sure that the note is complete in that way. I would say on the corollary side, then we start exploring in clinical context, what are ways that we can give providers feedback after the visit is done. And so if site of care decisions are made, things that incur unnecessary costs, like these are the types of filters where ambient can be listening and then cross-referencing that to some sort of clinical standard. And I think we all know from the days of the early EHR, adoption, that we don't want to constantly, ping providers or nuisance them with things that are extraneous. So the ability to apply like a filtered lens to where can we make a difference, where there's really high value, either monetarily or clinically in terms of outcomes, where making a recommendation to a provider is going to make a big difference. And so those are, in full transparency, those are use cases that we're still experimenting with, but the functionality exists. both in the ability to look at structured data and cross-reference structured data against those standards.
Yeah, I think, the mind obviously starts to go to really exciting places when you talk about stuff like that, particularly my own experience doing value-based hip and knee replacement care of having that surfaced at that time, to really have success in that and getting those insights when you need them, not be nudged annoyingly by the EMR for something that doesn't make sense or isn't contextual or doesn't necessarily apply to that situation, but having intelligent insights that surface when you need them and aren't there when you don't need them. So, Nick, the mind really starts to wander and you see the possibilities of this. How do you start almost de novo? How do you use a tool like this to begin to build value-based care in a way that's sustainable? We've had previous value-based care in MSK that hasn't been sustainable necessarily. Where does that take your mind? How do you see a tool like this really helping you and Commons design value-based care, data, situations or models that you can then take to somebody who's paying for the care and really show them how this is affecting the quality?
Well, yeah, and I think like so much to proving that value is proving that you are using the appropriate site of service, that you are proving kind of on pathway care, that you are diagnosing patients correctly, making sure they've gone through all of the different, steps to be approved for a total joint replacement, right? Like what, like in Ben, like in Massachusetts, like what are the steps with your major health plans to like get approved for a total joint? It's was it 6 weeks of physical therapy and that's failed and like different imaging, and I think that like in my opinion, like most of the time, like most physicians are bullshitting that. Like they maybe document it and like maybe those protocols are legit or not, but actually being able to pull out the real data, not only from like encounter, it's pretty easy with claims data to prove that someone went to PT or didn't and failed it, right? But also bringing all of that context out. I think too, whereas ambient technology today is really focused on the conversation that happens in the physician's office in the exam room, we're really excited about all of the care that doesn't happen there. And so, looking at surgical use cases, like, one big piece of that is operative notes, right? And historically, most of the ambient technologies have not really tackled, procedural notes, and that's something that we're really excited to be working with DeepScribe on. It's something that our physicians want, and like those historical like macros that don't really tell you all that much about the patient are basically not usable for a physical therapist, a PA, like whoever's doing follow-up care for that patient. And the more that we can make these things relatable and understandable for the rest of the team, the more valuable they are. And then also beyond that, integrating with even just our phone system, so that Commons care navigators who take really a care management role for our patients, the interactions that they have, a lot of healthcare happens on the phone. It's not just in the office again. And being able to put those conversations also through DeepScribe and ambient technology and give structure to navigation notes and those interactions, it ultimately brings everyone together on one core, on one core story for that patient. Like when a phone call with a navigator, an interaction with a clinician in the office, maybe a conversation with your physical therapist, when all of that is put in the same format, right, going through the same chassis, you can then ultimately give everyone context. And value-based care, among other things, is about a care team, working cohesively on behalf of the patient. And so, our drive towards kind of a singularity here is where I think Commons specifically is going to derive a lot of value and is already seeing that. And we hope the exhaust of that, all of that data, we can then turn into better patient-facing solutions. Deliver a patient a summary of what happened with their surgery, because like maybe you told them when they were groggy after anesthesia, but like they're going to want to refer back, right? And so ultimately, like taking human conversations and making them very easy to digest is the power of AI. And I think so much of value-based care is getting people on the same page, working towards the same story, and ultimately having the context to make good decisions, whether you're a patient, provider, care manager, and everything in between.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we talk about the care journey all the time, but we're not very good at documenting that because there's so many disparate pieces of that, and people are documenting different ways. But if you have almost this sort of living, breathing, longitudinal journal that's taking in information in a very natural way, but then parsing it and telling a story about this patient that anybody that's taking care of that patient can then access in a way that's useful to them, but you have this almost story of this patient journey, I think is really the holy grail of good, high quality care. So Dean, is that a pipe dream? Are we there? Are we getting there? How far away are we from sort of, ambient listening to or recording this entire journey, no matter where it is, the clinic, the surgery center, the PT, a phone conversation, and creating this constantly updating, but not overwhelming, well organized, record of the patient experience. Is that possible? Are we there? How far away are we?
Yeah, I would say we're definitely not there. I mean, if I had to guess, my rough estimate is that probably fewer than 5% of clinicians in the United States are using ambient today. We're very much in the early stages, and as we all know, like when OpenAI released ChatGPT, there was probably a huge leap forward, both in people in terms of what they expected from AI and how accessible it became for people to see what the power of a large language model was. I'd say, DeepScribe has been around since the COVID pandemic, and we've been building the ability for ambient AI to be helpful in a clinical context. But in the early iteration, we had humans in the loop, both as a way to help us build structure around data integrity, but also to be a quality check. And it wasn't really until the last year that the AI got so advanced that it was better than the humans in the loop. And I would say you've really just seen an explosion of interest in people trying to say, how can I take this technology and bring it into my workflow? Now, the importance of us building good products is all predicated on the ability to develop partnership, right? I mean, I'm an internist. I'm not a surgeon. I've been in an OR through med school, and then again periodically as a hospitalist. But I'm always going to be in a position where being able to listen to partners and hear how we can both integrate with their clinical workflow, with their EHR workflow, and bring the technology and focus it in a way where it becomes even more useful in even broader settings. I'd say we are, in the early set of innings in that process. To use a baseball reference, we're probably in the third inning there, and we're going to both get much more rapid expansion of users, but we're also going to be able to go much deeper, and then take the platform and use it not only as just an efficiency tool, but really trying to leverage the data that we're collecting and provide it back for the benefit of the provider, for the organization, and for the patient.
Dean, I have a question.
Yeah.
With the current LLMs that y'all are using to kind of power DeepScribe, like what are they not powerful enough to do today, but the next generation models are going to unlock new use cases? What are the things that you're excited about?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a better question for some of the technical people on the team in terms of, what they see in the windshield with regard to technology and functionality. I would say LLMs and the power of the LLMs are growing exponentially in very rapid succession. DeepScribe has a very modular
Yeah.
framework, different types of AI technology that are performing different services within the global experience. So, if a user hits a button, there's a recording, and then they hit a button, and then a note pops out, right? But what's happening behind the scenes is transcription through natural language processing is being structured, and then LLMs in different components are writing different parts of the note. In some ways, you want summarization. In other cases, you want more literal dictation and translation. And so the ability to do this faster, to do it much more accurately, one of the things we're really focused on in orthopedics is latency. So the amount of time that it takes from the time you're done to the time the note comes out the door. And right now it takes about, I'd say like a minimum of 3 to 4 minutes. And sometimes, up to a third of the visit length for the note to be finished. And what's really happening is that the LLM is doing serial processing and refinement of the note based upon clinical prompts that we give it in terms of take a generic SOAP note, but now make edits based upon the feedback that we've gotten from clinicians. And so as that process gets faster, latency within the next 6 to 8 weeks will get down to sub 1 minute, and then that then translates over into usability in clinic, because as we all know, orthopedic surgeons are typically doing multiple visits in rapid succession. They want to be able to review the clinical content with a high degree of accuracy, sign off of it, and move on. And so some of this is just incremental improvement. And I would say, there are stepwise functions of functionality that are probably around the corner that are even hard for me to speculate at this point.
Yeah, how often are you at the point now when the note gets generated that it's pretty good to go and the doctor or clinician can just sign off on it? Or is there still a fair amount of editing that needs to go on? I think that's one of the other concerns or criticisms of you're generating the note. Is it accurate enough? Do I still have to go through and make changes? Or are we at the point where the models are so good and the refinement is so good that it's, a quick glance I'm very comfortable with now that it gets the note 99% accurate 99% of the time? Or where do we stand with sort of the accuracy and the need to review and revise the notes?
Yeah, it really depends upon the clinical context. I would say globally, what we see is that fewer than 50% of like 45-50% of notes require zero edits from providers. There's another tranche where there may be a stylistic change or a word change. The most common form of an edit is in diagnosis selection. So as you know, when you speak to patients in layman's terms, you may use colloquialisms about the diagnosis or the condition that they're in. And so like if I was an internist, which I am, and we were talking about a patient who had high blood sugars and insulin, the computer can infer that that's diabetes. But it was not going to necessarily map to the highest form of specificity around diabetes if it doesn't have other clinical contexts related to comorbidities, et cetera. And so where we do see edits is when providers write over diagnosis codes because they think that they can capture something with greater clarity that wouldn't have been available to the ambient. Those are the types of things where what we really want to be able to do in further iterations is have the ambient be able to read the chart and then think about suggested codes based upon a broader clinical context. So it's interpreting the moment in the context of the patient that may have been over the course of a longitudinal documentation history. And so we're again, as computer power is expanding, that type of functionality is within sight.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think we get to sort of teach to the test a little bit, or the tail wags the dog, because we're so trained with traditional EMRs that it's about the coding, and the coding is not necessarily in line with how we think and document clinically. So, Nick, can we design? Is this part of sort of value-based care of doctors can document, they can speak more naturally. We don't have to do things that are sort of weirdly to satisfy coding requirements or prior authorization. Trying to guess what the insurance company wants in order to approve that particular procedure for that particular patient for that particular insurance company. Is that a part of value-based care? Is that a place that we can get to by sort of designing care models that move away from these artificial documentation, pieces and towards something that's a little bit more natural and more value focused?
Well, I think let's look at EMR 1.0. Like it came up because of meaningful use requirements and billing, right? I mean, like today, medical record systems are built around a construct of how you get paid, right? The promise of value-based care is that yes, you need a ton of data and documentation to make things accurate, but like it's not a billing code that's driving things, right? It's a capitation payment, or in the case of Commons, a bundled payment. And in that case, like the actual quality of the care and like the care that's delivered is way more important than how you put it on a piece of paper for an insurance company to pay you. And so I think all of these things ultimately need to kind of sit within inside one world. It's like what we want is better patient, doctor relationships. We want evidence-based care. We want to be able to prove that that's great care, and we want payment models to support that better care. Whether it's capitation in the primary care world, where you have to capture HCCs and things that are really important to know, like is this patient sick or not? I think we can be more accurate. Like there's a big article that came out this week about a big 800-pound gorilla that rhymes with Optum, and how they are, potentially upcoding a lot in the primary care world for risk adjustment, right? And wouldn't it be awesome if we all agreed that, like technology could do a better job of discerning what diagnosis code or HCC level is appropriate, or RAF score is appropriate for a patient, and we're all on a common playing field better, rather than who can game the system more, right? And I think that, as we evolve, hopefully, I think these technologies can bring, a level playing field to more folks to focus on, again, like make the main thing the main thing. The care is the main thing, and being excellent at coding is not the main thing. And that's going to unlock, I hope, a new generation of technologies that can be built on this new reality that are ultimately focused on just, better care foundationally.
Yeah, I think you should be rewarded for more complex care and taking care of more complicated patients if they're actually more complicated and not, manufactured complexity. And hopefully, tech tools will get us there, because you don't have to go in and game the system. It just sort of eventually figures out, or it knows by parsing the data that yes, this is a more complicated patient, as opposed to like telling somebody it's a more complicated patient. So, where do you guys see your respective companies, 5, 10 years down the road? Where will we be, Dean, 5 to 10 years from now? Am I even going to be necessary, or is the patient going to come in and talk to, an AI scribe, bot, ChatGPT? The cynic says that a lot of investors and tech people just want to replace doctors with AI and see this future of AI and no doctors. Should we be aiming for that? Is that going to happen? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? 5 to 10 years from now, am I going to be, at home in my underwear, trying to figure out what else to do?
Yeah, I mean, I would say 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined that we would be here where we are now, in terms of just the tech capability. I think everybody imagined it could come, but nobody knew it would be here this fast. It's very hard to predict 5 to 10 years down the road, Ben. I think in a landscape that's moving so fast, is there a work like, look, and I'll be honest, as soon as I started to see the DeepScribe technology, the first questions I asked the founders of DeepScribe was, is this thing going to replace doctors? And I would say, as I've been to conferences and I've talked to a lot of thought leaders, there is Neil Shaw, who you may know is CMO of Maven Clinic, wrote a great article in Health Affairs describing AI in healthcare and saying, people conflate AI as though it's all one thing. And in reality, to think about it in terms of like autopilot or driving, autonomous cars is a really great reference point where, in the level 1 version, it's all human. In the level 5 version, it's all computer. And there's scale in the middle. And I think right now we're at the 2 to 3 zone where computers can be assistive, like adaptive cruise control, lane control, steering control, an alert when you change lanes, but the driver is very much in control. Will it continue to progress to a point where, computers take the lead? I think that that's probably inevitable in some respects. I think that people are already showing models where AI can do better at interpreting an EKG than average cardiologists. And so I think, we're all going to be faced with very difficult, situations with regard to how far to push the technology. What is it capable of doing with high reliability? What's the role of regulation in determining that? We at DeepScribe are not trying to push that envelope. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make it easier for providers to catch really robust clinical data. We're trying to structure that data so that we can learn from it, and so that enterprises can learn from the data that their providers are generating. And then we're trying to figure out creative ways that we could repurpose that data to help drive and elevate the standard of care. In the next 12 to 18 months, I think we're going to go much further in that journey. What does it look like 5 to 10 years from now? I would say is really hard to predict.
Nick, along those same lines, what does it look like for Commons 5 to 10 years from now? We hear a lot about doctors practicing at the top of their license, and that phrase kind of gets my blood boiling a little bit because it seems like it's hey, we want to sort of take doctors out of the equation and replace them with lower cost, maybe not necessarily better options, but in a value-based care scenario, you really are helping doctors sort of be most efficient and get everybody to sort of do things that are in their wheelhouse and take away some of the things that aren't necessary or take time away from them doing things that they're best at and are high yield for them. So what does that look like from Commons perspective in the future of value-based care and using technology to kind of offload some of these things? Where do you envision that for Commons down the road?
Yeah, so I'll talk about this on kind of two sides of the same coin. Like very specifically with DeepScribe, like when when the major complaints that physicians have, regardless of specialty, is that they're spending too much time, writing notes and documenting. Like the obvious corollary is like, what if they had all that time back? Like two things are going to happen. One is they're going to have more time with their kids and they're going to be happier, and like that's I think great for the world. But then there's also time to think, right? And that thinking can be thinking about your patients, running new processes to have focus on care huddles for high risk patients and spend the time devoted to problem solving. Or it's opening up time for those same physicians. Like if you are an amazing oncologist at Dana-Farber, like I want you focusing some of your time on research, like unlocking the next set of innovations and also using AI tools to help you get there too. And so I think one of the amazing things about technology, writ large in technology paradigm shifts is that it's deflationary, right? And it opens up just exponential more capacity for productivity in what are ultimately our best and brightest, like our physicians. And so okay, so what does that mean for Commons? I think our physicians have more time. Our non-clinical staff have superpowers that they never had, and they can be using technology to close the gap between their knowledge and a clinician, physician's knowledge. And ultimately, I think the byproduct of this is we can run more efficient practices with lower overhead burden, less unnecessary work and steps to get simple things done, like closing out a note or submitting a bill to insurance, like things that take dozens of people at a practice, can hopefully be solved because technology does those things, and that opens up the opportunity for those people's jobs to change. Like change is coming, like it's inevitable, and the problems that they're going to be able to solve, whether that's solve a psychosocial issue and spend that extra 10 minutes on the phone with a high needs patient, or whether it's pursue a research opportunity or so much. I think that open capacity is ultimately just going to unlock like human ingenuity that we are stifled by today by just having too much operational burden. And so maybe that's a very high level way of saying that, like at a place like Commons, it's going to drive efficiency that we can focus on the more important new services, new care model iterations that are ultimately going to help solve the more enduring problems of our time, right? It's like we're doing too many back surgeries, right? We have an aging population with a lot of joints. Like how can we handle these things at bigger macro levels, or like God forbid work on like obesity and things like that are the underlying burden of musculoskeletal issues. I think we've got bigger problems, and like if we can solve a spine surgeon not staying up till 10 p.m. writing notes, like it's going to unlock a lot of productivity.
Yeah, I think it's exciting times. We're early on, as Dean said, but I think now's the time to be getting on board with these things. Now's the time to be starting to integrate these things and thinking about models that do integrate these things so that we can adapt to the times and really start to make inroads in meaningful adoption of technology in healthcare and also meaningful, sustainable, value-based care. So great discussion. Appreciate it with both of you guys. I think if you want to take a few seconds to wrap up, any final thoughts, if you want people to reach out to you, how they can reach out to you. Dean, why don't you go first, and then we'll let Nick go.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben and Nick. I mean, I would just say, number one, we're super excited to be partnered together. We think partnership is the key to building great products. The second thing I would say is if you look at the data today, we know that ambient saves time, we know that it makes providers happier, and we know that it makes patients happier. And I think that the hurdle for Nick and I to prove here in a very short period of time is that it makes care better, and it makes care more valuable for all those involved. And I'm confident that we have both the team to do it, the technology to do it, and the drive to do it. So yeah, thrilled to be here today. And Nick, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm just excited to start with the simple stuff, get this in the hand of our physicians, and expand the use cases and bring it to more and more pieces of our care model. I think it's going to have an immense impact on how practices run and drive value for patients. If you want to connect with me, I think LinkedIn's probably the easiest place. My name is my name, so go find me.
Awesome. No, thank you, both of you guys. This was a great inaugural episode of the Surgeon's Record webinar series. If you're interested in more, we have a Substack. Please check that out. And thanks again.